Now that we have some data, and as you can see, we are able to show this data in the back office, let's concentrate now on creating a Backend API module so that we can interact with this data through the Backend API. Just a little reminder about the Glue API. Remember that we have the Glue Storefront API and the Glue Backend API, and this is the module that we're going to be creating in this section. With the Glue API, we can use the JSON API convention, and that's the one by default. We can use no convention at all or establish our own convention. We can have access to our API by visiting the Glue Storefront DE Spryker local, or it depends on your store here. And you can see that we have access also to the Backend API by visiting these endpoints. As for naming conventions, we use the entity in plural. So if we have Antelope, we're going to use Antelopes. And you can see Glue Storefront and then Antelopes as the endpoint. And then the module that we're going to create for this endpoint would be AntelopesApi. In the case of the Backend API, we would have the endpoint Glue Backend. The name of the resource would be the same, but the module's name would be AntelopesBackendApi. So for the storefront, we use API postfix, and for the backend, we use BackendAPI. Also, the base classes are different. As you can see here, for the storefront, we go from kernel abstract factory, kernel abstract bounded dependency provider, and for the backend, you can see that we have the backend namespace into the kernel. For the dependency provider, the same thing. For Glue Storefront, we're going to use provide dependencies, and for the backend, we're going to use provide backend dependencies. The storefront has to use the client to have access to the backend, and the Glue Backend API has direct access to the facade. So that's the main difference between the Backend API and the Storefront API. As for the module, as you can see in this example for penguins, we create the module for the backend as name of the resource in plurals, Backend API. Then we're going to have the controller, that's the entry point for the call. Then a folder for the plugins, as we have to register this resource in the Glue Backend application. Then we're going to have the folder processor, and inside we're going to have a folder for creator, deleter, mapper, reader, response builder, updater. Then in the main folder, we have the config file, the dependency provider, and the factory. As you can see, it's a flat module. We don't have all of the layers that we find in Z. We just have the controller, the processor, and then we have the config file, the dependency provider, and the factory. And of course, in the share folder, we're going to have the transfer. If we need to create DTOs, then we place the name of the module inside the shared, then transfer, and inside the XML definition. So it's time to code our module. Let's jump back into our code.